Hey everybody, now we begin a new module leading up to the Nuremberg trial. So we want to look at building a new life after World War I, or the Great War, because nobody knows a second World War is coming at this point. And so I want to start off with just a sort of a mental exercise in empathy, and then we'll talk about some of the readings that are listed for this module, looking at the Covenant of the League of Nations, the Kellogg-Briand Pact. I entitled this Perpetual Peace with a question mark because that's a response to one of the readings I gave you at the beginning of the course on Immanuel Kant, who talked about perpetual peace. Is this going to lead to perpetual peace? So, just to try to put you in the mindset, or put yourself in someone else's shoes in 1919. Okay, so you have to imagine that it's 1919. So this is a century ago, right? This horrible, awful war is over. And you survived to live another day. But what's next for you? I mean, how do you move forward from this point in time? Because this war has affected everybody. So how do you move forward from here? Think about this. Like, what is your story? If you are this fictional person living in 1919 or soon thereafter, what is your story? Who are you? Where do you live? What do you do? What do you believe? Those kinds of questions can really help you think like you're living in that time period. Are you an American who has come home from the war with a lot of debilitating injuries? Are you a German who doesn't understand why the Germans lost the war? What do you believe? Do you still believe in God? Do you still believe in the goodness of humankind? Have you become more cynical? Has nihilism, that sort of ideology Friedrich Nietzsche put forward about there is no meaning to life, there's nothingness. This is just the point of existence is to try to minimize pain and maximize pleasure. Think about these kinds of things. You don't have to write that down. You don't have to post that, but just think about it. Try to exercise some empathy here. What would your life be like if you woke up in 1919? The war is over, and how do you move forward from there? And by the way, I forgot to mention, if you go to Canvas, I have a link to a piece of music. It's by Stravinsky. It's called The Rite of Spring, and he performed that music in 1913, so before the war. And Europeans absolutely hated it, thought it was terrible. They booed and didn't want to hear it again. But then after the war was over, Stravinsky's music was heralded as great and just a wonderful piece of music. I encourage you to go listen to that. I've got a link to a video on YouTube where you can see the London Symphony Orchestra perform it. It's a wonderful piece of music, but think about that. Think about how people before World War I thought it was terrible, but then after the war, they actually liked it. And that's sort of an interesting point, why? Why did their mindset change so much between just those few short years? So, League of Nations, I've mentioned them before. This is that organization that precedes the United Nations that we have today. And I just wanted to mention one thing about the Covenant. The Japanese, the representative for the League of Nations is seen here. The Japanese wanted a racial equality clause put into the League of Nations covenant. And this is what it would have said. The equality of nations being a basic principle of the League of Nations, the high contracting parties agree to accord as soon as possible to all alien nationals of states, members of the League, equal and just treatment in every respect, making no distinction, either in law or in fact, on account of their race or nationality. This is what the Japanese wanted, and it was blocked by the Americans and the British, who did not want to include this racial equality clause into the Covenant of the League of Nations. And I just want to make you aware of that as we look at this document here in a moment. Fast forward about 10 years, and you have what's called the Kellogg-Briand Pact. This is an image of Briand on the left. He's the French foreign minister at that time. And then the U.S. Secretary of State was a man named Frank Kellogg, and he's there on the right. This came about because the French wrote a letter to the United States in 1927. It was the 10-year anniversary of the U.S. decision to enter World War I. And so the French write this letter to the Americans, and they say, it's been 10 years since you came and helped the world defeat the Central Powers. So why don't we, the Americans and the French, why don't we come together with our own peace agreement? That'll be a model for the rest of the world to follow. And so you have what's called the Kellogg-Briand Pact. Sometimes it's called the Briand-Kellogg Pact. Sometimes it's called the Pact of Paris. It's all the same thing. 1928. It's finally signed, and you can see an image here of different dignitaries who are signing this agreement. This is a map of different countries who were agreed to join this Kellogg-Briand Pact. The United States, I think it's important to point out that we were one of the first ones to join the United States. You can also see the United Kingdom, Scotland, France, Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Italy, Japan, right? All these different countries. Australia joined. The light green countries join. They're not one of the initial states to join, but they do join at a little bit later date. And then you even have these teal countries that also become party to the Kellogg-Briand Pact. This is a political cartoon that I like to show students. It's interesting. Political cartoons can be interpreted in multiple ways, so I can't guarantee that this is the best way to interpret it. But I do think it's interesting that you've got this sort of nanny, who's Europe, pushing along the baby League of Nations, right? And the League of Nations is calling out Papa to Uncle Sam, who doesn't seem to recognize that, he helped create this baby. And Uncle Sam is over here focusing on a guide to Europe. He's also got a lady with a bird, a dove, in a cage, and it says New Peace Pact. It's almost like Uncle Sam, the United States, has forgotten about the League of Nations and has moved on to something different, or maybe more important, which is the Kellogg-Briand Pact. But you can see an image of Briand right here on his trousers. This is Briand who's walking along in the background. So it's an interesting political cartoon that I wanted to show you. Some questions that you can be thinking about. What changes in international relations did the Covenant of the League of Nations intend? This is something new, right? Like what is new listed in the Covenant of the League of Nations? What do you think of the Kellogg-Briand Pact? Do you think that it was valuable? Do you think it was important? Do you think it was not? And why? Now, we know that more wars are coming. A second world war comes, begins in Europe in 1939, begins in Asia in 1937. You can even go back to 1931 and say that war in Asia begins in 1931. But nobody knows in 1928 that another world war is coming. So obviously these efforts didn't succeed in that way. But does that mean that they don't matter? Does that mean they don't matter? Something I want you to think about. For next time, so begin reading the chapter in Bass on the Nuremberg trial, obviously. Also, start looking at some of the readings in the Michael Maris book. He provides a wonderful overview of the Nuremberg trial, and he gives a lot of primary sources that will give you some context into what was happening during the trial and afterwards. But start looking at those documents. I've listed several of them on the syllabus, but you can also read other ones if you just want more context, if you're more interested in learning about the Nuremberg trial. The Nuremberg trial is what I focus on in my research, So if you have any questions at all about the trial, or why it was significant, or why it matters, or maybe you just don't understand some part of it, maybe you think that it really wasn't all that important, by all means, comment on that. Send me a question if you have any. I'll be more than happy to try to help you with understanding the Nuremberg and its place in history after World War II. But that's all I've got, everybody. So have a great day, and I'll see you online.